All right. We are live. Hello, everyone. I'm Jennifer Alstyne, and welcome to this YouTube Live. Today, I'm talking with Dr. Jennifer Polk. We're going to be talking all about networking, but I do want to draw your attention to the live chat. Yes, absolutely. Hi, Matthew. Be sure to say hi in the live chat when you get here. Let us know where you're coming in from. I'd love to hear from you. Just say hi and introduce yourself. And during the conversation, if you have any questions, just type them into the live chat. I'm definitely going to be monitoring the live chat. So if you leave a comment or have a question, I'm definitely going to know about it. So please participate. And I'm excited for this chat. All right, let's get started. Hi, Jen. How are you today?
I'm good. Thank you. Sorry, I'm bringing up the chat here. Yeah, thank you so much for having me. And yeah, so folks know Jen is totally fine. I'm well. Thank you.
Good. I'm so glad. And I'm so glad that you could join me today to talk about networking. I feel like networking is something I didn't really know a lot about, and I didn't really know that some of the things that I was already doing was great forms of networking. And so that's why I was so excited to find you a couple of years ago and all of your resources about really how to connect with people. So just to get us started, would you mind introducing yourself?
Sure, absolutely. So Jen, I'm coming from you live in Toronto. So I often tell this story this way. I have a PhD in history, and I now work as essentially a life coach, but mostly career coach for academics, grad students, PhDs, helping folks figure out what's next. And I am often working with professors and PhDs who have their own small businesses. So the what's next and the kind of moving in that direction. I'm self-employed, and it's cool. You can learn more about me on my website, which is fromphd2life.com. That's all spelled out in words.
Awesome. And I'll put that in the chat as well. Just to get us started, like what is networking? Like, you're a networking expert. You are awesome at networking. I see you on social media talking with people all the time. I mean, all day, like on LinkedIn, on Twitter. You have amazing conversations with people. And so that's really what I want to talk with you about today. Like, what is networking?
Yeah, thank you. The way I approach this, and I think the frame you used is you having great conversations with people. To me, that's what networking is about in essence. And that can take place in many different ways, in many different fora, right? And so social media is a place to network, in person, of course, in various ways, one-on-one, in groups. And I also think of networking, an expanded definition of networking involves putting yourself out there in various ways and then inviting other people to join you in conversation, asynchronously, right? To use the term from higher ed these days. So it can happen, in live, real time, but it can also be part of a broader conversation that you're having with your members of your community. So I think key terms here are, yes, I like conversation, Jennifer, that you use, community, building relationships, and yeah, putting your thoughts out there and inviting other people to share thoughts with them. And so it's about learning and sharing information, advice, all of the above. So that's really a broad definition of networking. And I like it because this is too, I noticed what I did not say, which is go to a big networking event and start throwing business cards at people. Right?
That's what everyone thinks, right? That's like the traditional kind of prototype of what comes up when we think, oh, I'm doing networking, or like I need to do networking. It's that traditional in-person event where you're going and handing out business cards, right?
Boring. Mm-hmm. I mean, if it's exciting for you, please. I'm being crass, but of course there are lots of people, and I've done this too, where it can be a great venue to go to a big event and meet lots of people and having awesome conversations. So that if that suits you, or if any particular context that works, fantastic. But all of the other activities that you're doing kind of with other people or in public in some way are forms of networking, I think.
Nice. I really like what you said about community and about conversation. And a lot of the things that you brought up really sound like an exchange. It's not just hello, my name is. It's like what ideas can we exchange? What ways forward can we relate to? So that's really interesting to me in that kind of broader sense. It's more of an exchange, learning,
Absolutely.
meeting.
And
Yeah.
it's not something that you have to do because you need a job and it's, oh
Hmm.
shit, this is this thing that everyone says I have to do and I don't like it.
Yeah, for sure.
That is the wrong approach. I mean, you're
Yeah.
gonna not like it and no
Hmm.
one else will like it and it's not gonna work.
For
But it's,
those of you, oh, sorry. For those of you who are listening to this live chat right now, what did you think networking was? Or like, what have you done to network before? Let me know in the live chat. Hi, Krista. Hi, Hannah. Welcome to our conversation. I'm so glad that you're joining us from Vermont. Awesome. All right. So apologies. You can go ahead.
no, absolutely. I lost what I was saying. But yes,
Oh.
hello to I see the folks in the chat. It's nice to see you too.
One of the things that I was gonna say that that I noticed that you said was like, if those networking events work for you, if something like a big event works for you, then that's okay. But I think it probably doesn't work for most of us, right? That's why we're not doing it. That's why we're not already out there with our business cards, just handing them out. So, what are some other things people could do? Like, what can networking look like?
Yeah, absolutely. And so that the folks out there know, I do consider myself to be an introvert.
Me
So
too.
right, right. This is not a case of like, well, I'm an introvert, end of story. No, I call bullshit. So networking online is something that introverts really do amazing at, because we don't need to be like physically in rooms with other people and we get
Right.
energy from not doing that. So online networking there, and a key thing to remember is that this is something that takes place over time. So like building a
Right.
relationship, it's not that you meet and talk to someone for 5 minutes and you've networked. I mean, yes, in a narrow definition, but it might not be that useful or fulfilling or meaningful or pay off in various ways for either one of you or for the
Mm.
world more broadly. So specifically, what are some of the ways that networking can happen? So let's say you write a post on LinkedIn. And when I say a post, I mean just one of those like status updates, right? To borrow
Yeah.
from Facebook, but something
Like
short.
it's like a traditional social media post, but on LinkedIn. And people, when they're coming on LinkedIn, they'll see it in what's like their wall. Yeah.
Yep. It comes up in your feed, and then other folks can comment or react to it in various ways. That I think can be a form of networking, and then you can take the conversation further if you want. Down the road, you can start building relationships with people that comment on your post, that you comment on their post. You can expand your network in various ways without talking to people. And down the road, you can have conversations with folks, and it can be one-on-one. So that's one example of kind of doing something that doesn't seem like networking. Like I'm writing a post on
Right.
that's not networking, but actually it's part of this broader relationship building and information sharing and learning, etc. Twitter is a great place where networking can happen. I do think that Twitter is a networking platform. You don't have to treat it that way. You certainly can. I mean, these days, most of my clients come to me because not only from Twitter, but Twitter is one of the places where we have interacted and built a relationship,
Right.
often unbeknownst to me, but then we interact.
Yeah. Well, that's interesting because you said it's often unbeknownst to you. And that's something that I think that maybe a misconception about networking is that it feels really like um forced, or that it feels like very intentional perhaps, but it doesn't necessarily need to be. Like, you didn't know that those people were networking with you necessarily. You were just having conversations when they maybe replied to something that you shared, or sent a DM. So like you were just engaging naturally with those people, but they found it like networking, and ended up being networking because you connected for a later project.
Yeah, and of course, it can be something that you do more purposefully.
Right, of course.
So, for example, like let's say that I would be interested in working in instructional design. okay, it seems like a field that, you know, draws in some of the skills I already have. It seems that it aligns with my interests. I mean, for example, who do I know who works in instructional design or educational development or faculty development or, you know, whatever the terms that I'm reading online about, right? So I'm doing my own internal research about this kind of stuff, internal. I'm reading the internet, basically, reading articles. And then I think, okay, who do I know? Who do I already know? Oh, well, I don't know anybody actually. Okay, well, who do I know who might know somebody? Oh, people who work at universities. They might have interacted with people in the teaching and learning center or instructional design center. Let me ask around. Oh, then maybe you get in contact with somebody. So that's a purposeful way of doing about this. And then you have an informational interview potentially, which is a one-on-one thing, and it's fun because it's about learning and you get to ask questions, and it's low stakes. There's no audience. So that's kind of the classic way of networking by doing informational interviews. At the end of the informational interview, you're probably not going to be offered a job because that wasn't the point. But networking is a way of learning about fields from insiders and about, you know, so that you can judge for yourself whether you want to work in that field, what you need to learn, and then you can be useful to other people in your network who come to you later on and say, you know what, you should think about instructional design. I learned that it wasn't really the right thing for me or not right now, but I think you should talk to this person that I talked to or share that article that I read earlier. So it's all about this kind of ecosystem of knowing things and being useful, making connections.
I like that. So it sounds like networking can be both intentional, where you're looking for a specific goal. Like, I want to learn more about instructional design because I want to see if it's a good fit for me. But it can also just be something that happens naturally in your everyday life, like when you meet people maybe at a conference or when you're just having a conversation and that conversation goes well and all of a sudden there's a new person that you've met. That's really interesting. Let's see in the chat. Krista says, networking for me has been an excruciating process of meeting people at conferences. Oof, I totally agree. Honestly, I presented at a bunch of conferences that I did very little networking at because I am such an introvert that just going to panels and like talking to the people there, that's enough for me. And by the end of that time, I need to like be alone in my hotel room, eating some food and like watching TV. I need to decompress. So networking at conferences has never worked out for me. Krista, I can totally relate to that. What about you, Jen?
Yeah, it's interesting because conferences, although I get energized by them, they can be extremely overwhelming. And the last time I went to kind of a big work conference, my voice was like shot for a week. Right? I talked to so many people and I wanted to, and it was fun. But so, for example, let me give a different kind of example. I met somebody online. It sounded, I don't mean it in a dating context. There was someone who was in my field. This was when I was doing my PhD. He was also doing a PhD. We were writing on similar topics. So we exchanged emails. Okay. Then we organized, I forget whether we organized a panel, but we were on a panel together. So we met in person. So we both presented papers at this conference. And we did that 2 or 3 other times during the course of our respective PhD programs. Then he switched careers, and I had him on my Facebook in my network, right? And then he wrote a transition Q&A post for me for my blog. And so an example of, there was no intention of networking, and this was somebody who was in a different context. But now that we are in each other's respective networks, and he was able to help me out, and I'm hopefully able to help him out. But even if not, it doesn't have to be transactional. But I think it's a way of thinking about just making friends with people. And it's not that I would necessarily consider us friends, but that we can be friendly acquaintances.
Yeah, I like that. Friendly acquaintances is enough sometimes. That's okay if you like know who a person is and just, you know, if they have a cool update, you want to see it. Sometimes that's enough to spark a conversation, but oftentimes it's enough for me to be happy to see them in my feed or on my Facebook wall. And I've definitely found those relationships develop down the line over something that, you know, maybe we wouldn't have connected with early on, but now that we've maybe been acquaintances for a while, that can turn into something. So thanks for sharing that for sure. And just a reminder to the audience, if you have any questions, be sure to drop them in the chat.
I think what I'm talking about networking like it is everything. but I'm emphasizing this point because I want people to not be so boxed in with what they think networking is, and therefore networking is a specific thing and that which I don't like, and I therefore refuse to do it. But to think that yes, there could be specific things that aren't working for you, that's fine. That's more than fine. But what are other ways that you can interact with other people in the world, put your ideas out there, be in conversation with others?
So it's okay if something doesn't work for you, and knowing that is a good thing to know about yourself, but just know that there are other ways, and it's time to switch focus if you find something's not working.
Yeah, I'm looking at the chat too. Yeah, like it's small, making small talk at events. If that sucks, don't do that, right? You're gonna, put your energy into things that are working for you.
Okay, great. Let's see. Hannah says, networking to me has felt like I need to figure out what I might have to offer others that's interesting and useful. I usually find myself at a loss, or yes, making small talk at events, which hurts. So Hannah's probably another introvert who just feels like she's not sure what to say when she's networking. Oh, that's interesting that it's definitely like feeling like you need to be useful to other people to network. Do you come across that when you're talking with, say, PhD students and graduate students where they're just not sure what to say at all?
Yeah, and the comeback I would say to folks is, well, when you're doing an informational interview, it's not about you. It's not about you. You're asking somebody else the questions. Sure, in a real life, they might ask you questions in return, but really the point is for you to interview them. And so it's not about you, and you don't have to be interesting. What they will find interesting, because we're humans, is that other people like talking about themselves and they like giving advice. Hello. They listened to. They like an audience. I don't it's a nice thing to have someone listen to you. So that is what you can offer.
That's great.
That is what you can offer. That is interesting. And then down the road, and I don't mean to downplay, because yes, of course, there are things that are interesting about you and that you can offer. But if you're not feeling that right now, or in this particular context, that's cool. You don't have to force it. It's fine. It's not about you. You're alone. That's good.
I like that. That takes a lot of the pressure off when you don't have to feel the need to be interesting or to be, like your dissertation topic was so cool, and that's what I'm going to talk about in this interview. Like, that's not necessary, because it's about them and it's about learning as much as you can about what they do. One of the things that academics tell me, like when we're talking about managing their online presence, is that people don't really ask them what they do very often. They haven't had a lot of practice talking about it. So even just practicing with a friend, talking about what you do could help you in one of those situations, just be a little bit more comfortable with it, because it's just not something that we go around talking to each other in the halls being like, yes, my research is on this, or I'm teaching about this particular thing today. That just doesn't happen very often in conversation. Absolutely.
I'll give an anecdote for this. So years ago, I met up in person with someone who was a friend of a friend. So that was the connection. So I sent an email. Okay, we met in person and sat down, and he was a bit abrupt, and he was like, I have an hour. And I'm like, okay. First of all, an hour is a long time. But
yeah.
The story goes on. 3 hours later, he was like, I really should go now. He was having a great time. Now, and I was having, it was interesting for me too. So I did, totally didn't mind, but, I'm not saying we should have 3-hour information. My point is that, he came in with like, I'll give you an hour, and that's all I got. But he enjoyed the experience so much.
And just stayed.
It's an extreme example, but I think it shows the point I'm trying to make.
No, I think that's a great point, because even when I have interviews for the blog, and I'm having people like one-on-one, and it's not live, so it's just me asking the questions. Usually we plan for 30 minutes, and sometimes people talk so much it turns into 50. One time it turned into an hour and 15, and at the end he was like, "Oh, I guess I talked a lot," and I was like, "You did, but it was awesome." So we just kept going with it, because sometimes that's how conversations go. So I like that. You can do informational interviews. Sometimes it's really formal. Sometimes it's could go maybe ongoing because the conversation is so great, but making it about the other person and making that conversation about them and what they're doing and what you can learn from them, that's helps take some of the pressure off.
Yeah. And of course, what do you want to get out of the conversation is your starting point. But then you just have to ask questions.
That's great. Let's see. Matthew says, are there any things you shouldn't do when networking, like networking no-nos?
Yeah, I think in general, folks are empathetic and understand that these things are difficult. So when I say that there are some things you shouldn't do, I don't mean to shame anyone who has done them, right? That's not my point. Anyway, so with that disclaimer said, I think in general it's best not to. And I say these things in general and from a context of the US-Canada work culture. Mm-hmm. So, depending on where you are in the world or what the specifics are of your industry, it may not make sense. Okay, disclaimers, done. So what is best not to do? I think it's best not to reach out to complete strangers and without being very clear about why them. So if you are going to reach out to a complete stranger, that's totally cool. You can do that. Why them? So make it very clear, like not just like, oh, you're a random person who works in instructional design, but like, no, why that person specifically? Say a little bit about yourself, not too much, a sentence or two is fine. And then be very clear about what you want from them. And this is the step that a lot of people miss. It's like, I want to pick your brain. Yeah. Make sure that what you're asking for is something that is not easily Googleable. And there are some questions that if you really distill down what you actually want to know, you could just write the question in an email and they can write back and that's it. But if you, right, so really try and figure out for yourself, like what really you want to get with having this conversation with this person. And so it makes it easier for them to say like, oh yeah, okay, that's cool. I will accept this invitation. And do you have 20 minutes of your time? So what not to do is sort of reach out to total strangers with a long rambling, no connection, kind of vague. That people don't have time for that. I mean, you might get lucky, but no one has time for that. I would also say that it's okay if you have your resume on your phone when you go and meet somebody, but generally speaking, they're not going to be interested in your resume or your CV. They don't want to see your portfolio. I mean, they might ask for it and that's cool. And if they do, then that's your invitation. But this is not an opportunity for you to circumvent a hiring process.
Right. It's not for hiring. It's for learning.
Yes, this is not an opportunity to circumvent a hiring process. So one general no is if you know that there's an open job ad and you are already planning to apply for it, or you're thinking that you might apply for it, this is not the time to try and reach out to somebody in that company in hopes of learning more. If you have specific questions for the hiring manager or the HR person about the job, of course, but this is not the time because that can be seen as trying to circumvent the hiring process. The better approach at that point is to say like, oh, I will apply, and then to alert folks in your network that you've done that as relevant. Was something else I wanted to say about that point. Right, but what you can do is if you do see an open job ad, but you don't want to apply for it, but you do want to network with people in that company, what you could do to signal that like I am aware and I'm not trying to like get away with something here. You're like, I saw that there was this open position. I am not planning to apply. However, I am interested in learning more. I'm happy to wait to do that. If that's the best approach, or you could decide personally to wait 3 months.
But sharing that you're aware of that and not interested could still get you an informational interview like you wanted without making them feel pressure, like you might be trying to sneak your way into the job.
Yeah, just in general, it's best like, what can you do so it's not awkward?
And being communicative about your expectations, your needs up front is a great way to do that, it sounds like.
Yeah, and if you take the extra step and actually formulate some kind of questions that you already have, you could even let them know about it. I don't think you necessarily have to do that, but that's pretty cool. Like, here's kind of my 5 key questions that I'm imagining asking. It's not that you're stuck with that script, but that really shows prep and that you will keep the meeting whether it's virtual or in person, that you will keep it really on task.
Awesome. Now, what about people who maybe aren't looking for a job, like they're in their tenured professor position, or they have a full-time researcher position that they're happy in, they're not planning on going anywhere anytime soon. So how can they network? Like why is networking still important for them?
Absolutely. So networking is really important because, and you do it anyways, probably because you are interested in the field that you work in. You're interested in the people that are your colleagues, whether they're your direct colleagues or folks in the broader field. You will probably go to industry conferences, scholarly conferences as relevant to you. What comes out of networking, is these people, you have interests with them. Here comes the cat. You have shared interests, so it's fun, right? It will advance your career potentially because you'll know more about what's happening outside in your industry more generally. So you get to learn and be someone in your team that is connected with other people. It sets you up for potential opportunities down the road. This is what happens when people change jobs within their same field. It's because they learned about interesting people and projects happening elsewhere and they move to go to them. In an academic context, you can get collaborators. I mean, this is how people get collaborations. You can't, I think a lot of what people already do is networking and they just don't call it that.
Yeah. They just don't know that the things that they're doing in their everyday life is actually networking. And it doesn't feel maybe as intentional to them, even though they feel like they have to do it. So that's interesting that they're already doing these practices on a regular basis.
Yeah. And if you happen to not like your job, well, so much more reason.
Yeah. Right. And being able to talk to other people in your field might help you gauge whether you do have a good job or maybe you could get a better one.
Yeah, and the point here is to remember that networking is not a signal to other people that you want to leave. So let's say you're a tenured professor and you secretly think that you might want to leave. Well, it's fine to talk with people elsewhere. And in this particular example, you could say, if anyone was interested, oh, well, I'm doing research so that I can better help my students.
Got it. That's a great idea.
Always kind of framing that you can use if you just want to signal to folks that you're happy where you are. And you can even say, I'm really happy where I am, but I'm always interested in exploring other possibilities to enliven my work, whatever. Lots of things coming in. Okay.
All right. Anne's question is, how do you think that the current climate with most conferences going online will affect networking?
I think that's a super interesting question. And I think it's going to require more work out of people. Some folks were already doing the work of identifying in advance who were going and setting up coffee dates and whatever, right? Sort of making plans, setting a schedule. And so, of course, that can continue. But more of that will need to happen. And I think there are ways that the technology and conference organizers are being clever around these things of making virtual spaces for folks to like bump into each other in the hallways, as it were. So I'd be interested to see what folks come up with. But I think in any case, in any event, even with in-person conferences, there are ways for you to be intentional before the conference ever gets going. And then of course, during it, and then after. So consider the conference is not just those 3 days, but that it's, the month before and after the conference where you have an opportunity to reach out to people before and after and see where it goes. So that doesn't change.
Yeah, that's great. Especially in the days before a conference start, like people are really excited about it. They're definitely looking for, say, the conference hashtag on Twitter. So if you're posting about it yourself, like not even necessarily reaching out to other people directly, but like if you're posting about it yourself and using that conference hashtag, people from the conference are going to see it and maybe they'll strike up a conversation. Or you can visit the hashtag and see if you want to talk to someone there. It's already like a very natural time to talk about it, to think about it. So there are other people who want to do that too, for sure.
And this is the connection. So if you're thinking like this person is a stranger to me and why would they give me the time of the day? Well, I went to your talk or I'm planning on attending your panel.
Yeah, that's excellent. Even if you can't attend the talk, you're like, I have another thing to do at that time. You can say, hey, I'm super interested in this topic. I'd love to chat with you about it. Or, maybe could I get a copy of the slides afterwards if you're following up from something that you missed. So that's definitely a great opportunity. You can network before, during, and after a conference, whether it's virtual or in person. That's true. But especially for virtual events, people are already primed to be talking about those things.
Yes, and to use your example from before, Jennifer, I saw, Brian tweeting about your panel. I'm sorry, I completely missed it. It didn't pop up on my radar until later. I'd be super keen to know more. Do you have articles that you could share with me? It doesn't have to lead to conversation, right?
Absolutely.
What recommend I do?
Yeah, there's so many ways to strike up a conversation about that kind of conference that doesn't have to take place in the room. Lots of other opportunities. All right, this question is, I feel like I'm able to take the first step, but the connection fizzles out after the first meeting and follow-up email. How do you make a connection memorable?
So I think the first thing here is to acknowledge that not every conversation that you're going to have is going to lead to a meaningful, rich, lifelong connection with a person. And that's totally fine. That's totally fine. If there was a connection, you don't have to force following up. I think that's, some people say, put it in your calendar every 3 months, make sure to get back in touch with somebody. And if that's your jam, okay. But that's always felt forced to me.
It's a little forced,
but
yeah.
Maybe there's kind of a compromise there. What you can do is when you think of a person, get in touch with them. Send them a quick email. I was just thinking about you today. I read this article. It reminded me of this conversation we had. Here's the article. Or I spoke to somebody else, and I remembered I was reflecting back on what you and I talked about, 6 months ago. I think if you did have some kind of connection in an exchange, then you will be remembered. And if not, no stress. Everyone has different kinds of memories, right? You can remind them, but not everyone is. It's okay.
Yeah.
It's okay. Just chill. One of the people that I did an informational interview with when I was finishing my PhD was someone that I had met, I think, in person twice over the past, 5 years. Mm-hmm. And I wrote to him because he was working a job that I was potentially interested in also working. And I said, you probably don't remember me, but we did meet, this kind here and here. And he wrote back and he said, I totally remember you. We talked about this. I'm super happy to, have a tea with you. You can come by my office and we can go to the local Second Cup. This was a few years ago, before time.
Before coronavirus.
So you never know. You might be more memorable than you think you are. But I think you don't have to force it. Nobody has time for that.
Yeah, I really like that. I was going to say, when you said like setting reminders, so that's something that I do for like my friends and family's like birthdays, right? Like I do it so I don't miss something that's important to them. And it's like a specific date or something that's important to them. So like I want to remember on that kind of date. But when it's like a networking thing, I'm definitely more likely to just connect with them on social media. And like if they share a cat photo, like I'm definitely going to engage with that. Like that's something that I'm going to be interested in, whether it's personal or whether it's about their work. Like if I'm interested in it, I'm going to engage with it. And I think that can make a big difference for carrying on a relationship that may not be like a one-on-one where like you're having conversations on a regular basis. That's not right for everyone. But being connected on social media can help a few years down the road if there's something that does come up.
Can we talk about cat pictures for a moment?
Yes.
So don't mean I'm hijacking the conversation. People often say, when is it okay to be personal on social media? Should my social media be completely professional? Should I have different social media, one for personal if I want, one for professional? Like the answer is it depends on you. But yes, as Jennifer's example shows, personal stuff works. And this is, you can consider this part of a strategy, but also just we're humans and people relate to people.
Yeah, absolutely.
People relate to people and people do business with people. Right? They do, and people hire people. So the fact that people that I don't know that follow me on Twitter know that my cat's name is Izzy and appreciate when her tail goes by on the screen, that makes me memorable in a certain way. And it's not that I've engineered her to walk across my desk.
No, it is memorable because my fiance Matthew is my YouTube channel manager, and he has worked with Jen before when she was doing Beyond the Prof, taking her webinars and stuff. But he, right before we started, he was like, be sure to ask about her cat. I remember that her cat was at the vet, and we talked about her cat before we started because we're both cat lovers, and that's something that we can relate to. But people love cats, people love dogs, people love what you're reading or what you're watching, like what you're up to. So don't feel the need to be totally private, even if you do have separate accounts. I personally have like a personal account and a business account, like on Twitter and on Instagram, and I still share personal things on my business account because that's how people can connect and relate to me oftentimes. So definitely don't be afraid to share some things, just what you're comfortable with. All right, we have another question. In your experience, what is the best way to explore possible opportunities in organizations you'd like to work in?
Yeah. So what is the best way to explore? I think it depends on what you've done already. In general, I would say it's always really good to reflect on what you want in a job, in a career, and a life. So make sure that you know yourself, and that is an ongoing, lifelong process. But I can't emphasize that enough. It is really important to start your explorations with your own self. And of course, in conversation with other people or pets in your life as relevant, whatever your situation is. So definitely start with yourself. And then it's a matter of, yes, I like the phrase, the term exploring here. And there's lots of different ways of doing this. But I would say that at a certain point, you do probably want to talk to people. If you've never talked to anyone in that field and you see a job ad and you're like, oh, I must apply to this. I mean, for sure, go for it. But in general, in a job search, at a certain point, you are going to want to speak with people who are doing that kind of job or work in that company or something, right? Because you can't know everything without having a conversation with people on the inside. So definitely part of the exploration process is going to be talking to people, and that's where information interviews come in. It's not the only thing to do. You can do a lot of research online, reading blog posts, following folks on social media, following their conversations, getting involved in their conversations. Maybe you recognize that you do have something to contribute to the conversation at some point from a different angle. You can do that too. You don't have to be passive in this, right? You can jump in and be an active participant, etc. But yeah, I think including talking to people is part of the exploration, not the only.
That's great. Yeah, I hope that answers your question. Definitely everyone starts out in a different place, but I love that your answer was like, you can do this, but here are some other things that you can do as well. And it goes back to what we were talking about in the beginning, where it's like, if something doesn't work for you, here's what, what else you can do. And here's how you pivot to find what does work for you. But you do need to talk to people in a field to know what happens in it, to know the details of the day-to-day. So that's so important. Thank you. Let's see. Does anyone have any more networking questions? Be sure to drop them in the chat and I will, read them out loud and ask them. What you had just mentioned, I loved that you had asked your social media audiences after finishing with Beyond the Prof, you were like, I'm ready for my next step. I'm ready for my next career move. And you asked them, what do you think I should do? Why did you do that?
It's interesting so in the context here is that I already have some sort of established reputation brand. Mm-hmm. There's something out there, right? I mean, for everybody who exists online, there are the people who are experiencing you online, they will have some conception of you. Yeah. So I was curious in what people would think of me if they didn't know already what I did. And so it was fun. It was interesting. Some people said psychologist, a bunch of people said, professor. Of course, some people know that what I do, so they got it right, sort of. But it's interesting.
What was that experience like for you? Like when you got back responses that were like you, how did that feel? Or when you got responses back that were like totally, far off field, what was that like?
The surprising ones are always interesting.
Mm.
The surprising ones are interesting. And I will tack onto this. The thing that I often think and sometimes share is that what other people tell you to do and what other people think you should do and the advice other people give to you, take that in, but run it through extensive filtering because you know yourself best.
Yeah.
So, and information gathering is good and it gives you power, but it is up to you what you want to do with it. So the fact that people think that I potentially could work as a psychologist does not mean that I should, go and do a psychology PhD. I don't have a psychology PhD.
Mm-hmm.
That's not the answer. The fact that some people think that I was a scientist because I engage with a lot of science topics on my Twitter I'm not, right? It's not going to upset my worldview, but it's interesting. It's interesting. And and I did it as a fun thing, but it can be a useful test. I'll give an example. A client of mine, he did an informational interview. And when he started the conversation, the woman said, "Oh yeah, I looked you up. I read your LinkedIn." And from there, it sounded like, you want to do X, Y, and Z. And he was like, I don't know what he said in the moment, but he told me afterwards, like, "Oh shit, that's totally not what I want to do. So I need to change your LinkedIn. I need to change my LinkedIn," right? And so it was a valid. He didn't seek, perspectives, but he got one, right? About what his online persona, what his profile was saying, at least to this one person, was saying about him and what he wanted. And it wasn't matching what he wanted. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. Because I run into the same thing when I have people who are getting ready to redesign their personal websites or to, redo their LinkedIn profiles, and they just don't necessarily know what they're saying already is communicating to other people. So one of the first things that I have them do is I'm like, go out and ask someone, like ask a friend who doesn't know what you do in detail, like ask them what they learned from your website or what they learned from your LinkedIn about you. They're already interested in you as a person. So like they're going to pay attention when they spend some time on it, but most people won't. Like most people who are coming to visit your website or coming to check out a LinkedIn profile, they're taking a quick glance and just seeing if it matches with what their needs are. But your friend, they're gonna like spend some time and read things, and they'll be honest. If they don't understand something, they're gonna tell you. So that can be definitely valuable to hear what other people think. You can decide what you want to do with it. You don't have to change anything, but knowing what other people's impressions of your online presence is will help you understand what maybe more people's perception is.
Yeah, and that will get you a better life.
For sure.
You will, I don't mean to be all like rule of attraction. I'm not going to be that way, but you will attract opportunities and conversations that you want to.
Yes. Yes. When people, find you online and they know what you do and they know what they can talk to you about, they're more likely to reach out. They're more likely to start that conversation, whether it's on social media or email or, down the line, they meet you at a conference and they're like, "Oh, I know who you are." It's all about like knowing who the person is and like a little bit about them. If you don't have those two connections, then it's just a name, and that may not be as memorable.
Yeah. A good exercise is to go, have someone else Google you. And what comes up?
Yeah, absolutely. And if you're Googling yourself, you can use an incognito or private window, and that'll allow you to see what other people see and not what your kind of personal Google search results are.
Yeah, great tip. Yeah, and I think there's a way for you to see your LinkedIn profile the way the public sees your LinkedIn profile too, right?
Yeah, like a view as. You can definitely do that. And I'll drop a link to some of these tips into the chat after the video, just for anyone who's watching later. And then, I just want to ask, like, what are you up to now? I'd love for you to promo your services. I know you're self-employed now, so just what are you up to now?
Yeah, thanks for asking, Jennifer. So these days I have reignited, relaunched my solo coaching business. So I work primarily one-on-one with folks, figuring out what's next and moving forward in their careers. And from tenured professors who want to go up to full and get their research in order, to tenured professors who want to leave academia, to PhDs who have their own businesses, happily outside of academia and just want to, continue to make strides. In general, any grad student or PhD, you want to move forward in your career, that's the type of client that I work with. And I'm doing other things, speaking engagements with, I know that there's more to come. I don't know exactly what the more will consist of yet, but I'm giving myself permission and time to see what comes up, and including that part of that process is having conversations with folks in my network and folks who are not yet in my network to learn about what they're doing and get inspiration and share ideas and maybe pick up collaborators.
I love that. So if you're interested in working with Jen, be sure to check out her website, From PhD to Life. I'll drop that in a chat again in a second. We do have one more question, if that's all right with you, Jen. The question is, what is the best way to pivot from a rejection, knowing that you want one day to have a position within the company? So like, you definitely want to work at this company and you've been rejected. What do you do?
So, okay, take time to grieve. That's okay, right? You know, if you need to feel shitty for a day, cool. Recognize that a rejection is never about you. Rejection is never about you. It is about them. It is about what they want. So when they hired somebody that wasn't you, it's because they made a determination about what their needs are, and you're not privy to those determinations. So they made a determination, but based on what they think and what they want, which is all about them. And they decided that your profile wasn't you or what they wanted. Does that make sense? It's really about them and what they want. It doesn't say anything about your competence or your merit or your qualifications or anything. Okay. So once you sort of allowed yourself to like grieve and you recognize in the logical part of your brain that it's not personal. Of course, it feels personal, but it's not personal. Jobs are plentiful. There's plenty to do in the world, and things change all the time. So if you are still interested in that company, you know, wait a minute and then follow up. You can follow up with the people that you interviewed for. I super appreciated, or maybe you didn't interview, maybe you just applied. You know, I really appreciated the process. You know, I learned blah blah blah. I'm interested in potentially working, you know, with you down the road. Can we have a conversation, or can you direct me to speak to somebody? You know, there's different ways depending on what exactly you want. But I think it's totally cool to follow up, not the next day, right? Give them a chance. Give, you know, in this context, you know, maybe give that hiring process time to sort of sort itself out. So you might need to wait a few months. As you wait a few months in the meantime, who else would you want to talk to in that industry? Who else in that company? Maybe far removed from that particular hiring process. So keep having conversations. Keep having conversations. There is no dream job. There is no like, this is the only thing. That's not a thing. That doesn't exist. Take that out of your mind. So yeah, just boil it down. Grieve. Recognize it's not about you. And then you might wait for a bit, but keep the conversations going. Keep the conversations going.
I like that. And I think if I were a hiring manager too, if someone followed up with me who had applied to my job a couple of months ago and they were still interested in working for my company, like I may not have a job for them, but I'm definitely going to want to talk to them because that's someone who's really enthusiastic about the company. They did their research, and maybe I didn't interview them for that position because it wasn't the right fit, but maybe there's one that's coming down the line that I think that's a great idea. And I love what you said about it not being about you. It's about them. Like it's about them and what they need and what their decisions are. And because we really have no idea what those are, how can it possibly be about us? Like, how can we respond to those needs if we don't know them necessarily?
Yeah. It's always flattering when folks want to work with you. Right?
Yeah, absolutely.
It's a nice thing. I know the job process, you know, if you're in a pile of 300 other resumes, it's not so fun. But in general, it's a nice thing when somebody wants to work with you.
Yeah. Well, this has been a great conversation. I feel like we've covered a lot of different topics about networking, from, what networking is to what are some things that we think networking is that are just wrong or like misconceptions about it, to really like what are some real ways that we can start to network and start to evolve our own practices about it. Is there anything that you'd like to add before we end this live stream? Are there any last minute questions out there?
One thing I would say to folks is, what's the thing that you're gonna do now after having had this conversation with us? What's your next step? What's the small next thing that you're gonna do? What's your takeaway? So I would challenge everyone to have, you know, the one thing that they're gonna do. And that doesn't have to be big. It doesn't have to be apply for a job. But what's the one tweet that you're gonna send to somebody saying, hey, I really appreciated the article you wrote, an email that you're gonna send, a post that you're gonna write? I mean, what is your one thing?
I love that. So everyone who's listening, I hope that you come up with one thing. I know that I am. I'm gonna come up with something from our conversation today because I feel like I felt like I had a handle on networking, but now that we're talking about it, I feel like I understand it even more and I feel more comfortable. Like I'm an introvert. I am uncomfortable like talking to a lot of people at once. And I can't believe that like a year ago, I was never on video and now I'm doing like YouTube live and I'm here talking with all of you who are watching. Like I'm excited about that, but that's something that I thought I was uncomfortable with and has adapted over time. So I'm definitely ready to take whatever the next step is for me in networking and ready to figure out what that is after we end this call.
Yeah, and you and I are doing this because we network.
Yes, that is very true. I connected with Jen on Twitter a while back. I have had conversations with her just on Twitter based on what she said or what I've said in the past. And then we connected on LinkedIn and I invited her to come do this with me. So networking can result in some really cool things like this, this actual event. And I'm excited that you've all joined us.
Yay. Thank you so much. And thanks to everyone joining and commenting, asking questions. I really appreciate you guys putting yourself out there.
All right. Thank you so much, Dr. Jennifer Polk. You can learn more about her at, apologies, your website.
From PhD to Life. Yep.
From PhDtolife.com. I'm going to drop that in the chat. Thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah, thank you.